All right, we're live. Hello. Welcome everyone to our first Marketers on Fire for Chief Marketer, LinkedIn Live. I'm Kaylee Haltgren, editor of Chief Marketer, and I'm joined by Sarah Crockett, global CMO at Dickies. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Great to have you. We're going to have a chat about some of the brand's latest marketing initiatives, the art of brand collaborations, marketing to younger generations, and more. First, a quick word about our Marketers on Fire series. Chief Marketers started our monthly Brands on Fire and Marketers on Fire editorial series a couple years ago. The profiles highlight the brands and the people that are shaping, pushing, and disrupting the industry. From innovative campaigns to unconventional thinking, each profile showcases the strategies, analyzes the impact, and profiles marketers and companies that are making the marketing industry a more effective, interesting, and vibrant place to be. These are editorial features. You can find them on chiefmarketer.com, including Sarah's profile, that we've decided to do as LinkedIn Lives as additional content for our readers and followers on social media. So thanks very much. In terms of the Q&A, if any of you are following along on LinkedIn, please put in questions for Sarah and we'll try to get to them if we have enough time at the end. So let's get started. First, Sarah, I would like you to take us through a little bit of the strategy behind the campaign that we initially heard about and chose you for Marketers on Fire for. It's called Crafted Together. It's a collaboration with Jameson that included a capsule collection inspired by the brand's mutual dedication to the art of craftsmanship. It had 10 cool signature pieces that were reimagined, a limited edition Jameson Dickies bottle, influencer marketing, events, and more. So can you talk a little bit about the significance of the campaign, its goals, and how it moved the brand forward?
Yeah, we were so lucky to be able to partner with Jameson. Jameson, Dickies is 101 years young, I like to say. Jameson, however, has been around since 1780. So it's incredibly storied brand. And an opportunity to put the two brands together in a unique way, to your point around these specific collection items, but really about the activations as well. So this collection was available in 26 countries around the world. We kicked it off with some really exciting activations in New York City and London specifically. Some beautiful products. It actually was one of our most successful collaborations that the brand has seen to date. The way that we measure success is really layered, as many campaigns are. But we look at success in this case with regard to people's interest in the product, both the bottle on Jameson side, as well as the products that Dickies specifically sold from our line as well. We also look at success with regard to the types of customers that we end up meeting through these activations and through these collaborations, which is always part of why a brand should choose to collaborate anyways, is this really interesting intersection of shared communities and mindsets. And this notion of crafted together is obviously a territory that we landed on together because of the heritage and the roots and the makers aspect of both brands. But they also offer a really interesting consumer set for Jameson, and Dickies offered a really interesting consumer set for, that Jameson benefited from. So a couple different ways of measuring that success, but really, really happy with how the overall partnership came together.
So you used influencers for this campaign. Can you talk a little bit about how you leveraged influencer marketing in the campaign, and then also a little bit about Dickies' overall influencer marketing strategy?
Yeah, so we had partners like Travis Bennett, an actor who's a huge fan of Dickies, as well as Jameson. Recently on the show, Dave, he was an example of an influencer I'll call out specific to this campaign. More largely, though, influencer marketing has been around for quite a while, and I know that there's been different waves of whether or not this is going to stick or work. And I actually think brands have gotten really smart about when, where, and how to partner with influential individuals. And the word influential can mean anything, right? For us, as an example at Dickies, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have the largest audience. Sometimes you absolutely could. However, what's more important is that there's a really authentic interest in the brand. So in that example, Travis had a very, very storied interest in the brand Dickies, as well as Jameson. So it was a really nice, authentic fit. He was a huge brand fan, happened to have a great audience. It's a way for us to really create word of mouth at scale. And where our consumers are spending their time more and more happens to be on these social media platforms. Where they're getting their news happens to be from their networks, far more than the kind of classic linear model. So ensuring that our brand and our stories and our campaigns are being able to be shared through these partners to create that word of mouth at scale not only creates visibility, but it also adds a really interesting dimension. How Travis chooses to talk about the partnership is going to be different than how the brands would choose to talk about the partnership. And that layered approach to storytelling is something that we're always seeking to create.
Mhm. So Dickies, you're sort of experts at brand collaborations. You've had a lot of experience with them as brand. So do you have any best practices to share regarding the art of collaborating with another brand and still kind of maintaining your own identity while creating something new?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got a very storied past of collaborations. Absolutely. We're a lucky brand in the sense that our products are beautiful blank canvases. And especially when we look at the icons like the Eisenhower jacket that we leveraged in this Jameson partnership as an example, they happen to be very simple blank canvases so that when we do choose a partner to collaborate with, they can really put an interesting spin and interpretation on the brand. As far as best practices go, again, that overlap. What is that shared interest? What is that unique red thread that goes across both brands? And when I say both, that indicates two. We also have some really great examples of what I like to call the trifecta, which is where you bring three parties together. So we did a partnership with Ford and Sydney Sweeney as an example. So it ended up being Ford, Sydney Sweeney, and Dickies. And that was an opportunity for us to build a new workwear line for women in the auto industry that had a interpretation through Sydney's vision. And that was presented through interweaving the DNA of Ford on the canvas of Dickies. And only Dickies can do that, really, because Sydney picked Dickies for this because we are the tried and true workwear brand that she always goes to when she's in the garage. And we're able to leverage our icons and those blank canvases to allow her vision to come to life.
It almost seems like people picking Dickies. It's like that's a bit of an advantage, right? But then there's the challenge of still maintaining the product's integrity. So I
Exactly.
understand that. Speaking of, how do you balance celebrating a classic product while also innovating for younger generations? Because Dickies is has a very long history, right? So
Yeah.
how do you keep it attractive to younger people and still make it, the Dickies that everyone knows and loves?
Yeah, you kind of touched on it, right? Like there's some elements that are just untouchable, right? That really indicate that DNA and bring the brand to life in a way that every customer who seeks out Dickies would expect them to have. An example of that would be in our 874 work pant. One of our top icon styles has this white thread. If you flip the cuff of the pant, it's a white thread. And there's a really interesting story as to why it has the white thread. But that's something that customers have started to look for when they're wearing a work pant. If it's got a white thread, oh, that tells me it's Dickies. So there are certain things that are sort of untouchable in that sense. But when it comes to innovating across this really diverse consumer set that Dickies is lucky to have as a 101-year-old workwear brand, people chose Dickies to begin with because of that authenticity and that honor to the core and that workwear essence. Staying true to that creates a level of authenticity that appeals to generations across the board. We're also lucky to have been picked by skaters decades ago. So skaters picked Dickies because of the functionality, the durability, the cost of the product. It's hard to kind of blow through a pair of Dickies pants in the first place, but if you do and you have to replenish, it's not going to break the bank, right? So this community really adopted our brand decades ago. And anybody who knows anything about skate knows that it has this influence across broader, younger consumer sets. Streetwear came from skate, and that tends to attract a younger consumer base. So we recognize that and we honor that by really giving back to the skate community every chance we can by supporting the athletes, by building skate parks as we did this past year in our own backyard in Fort Worth, Texas. And by creating products for skaters every single year, multiple times a year. So that's our opportunity to really respect that community that picked us and allows us to stay relevant and connected to today's youth.
Are you marketing this collaboration, or we can actually open that up to other things that Dickies is doing? How are you marketing your products to younger generations in other ways? Are you using specific channels,
Yeah.
social media, in addition to what you just mentioned?
Yeah, of course. First of all, I think it's really important that you reflect the community and your creative. So not only just channels, but also what's the creative, what's the content that you're putting out into the ether. So back to the Jameson collaboration, we really partnered with our skate team. We took them to the distillery in Dublin, and they were a huge part of that campaign. So reflecting the consumer is important. And then, of course, as the channels continue to diversify, making sure that we are plugging into channels that have our consumers actively engaging in them. So that's your TikToks, your Instagram. We have a specific skateboarding handle across our social media platforms for the really, passionate skaters who are really coming to Dickies just to learn more about our riders, see what they're up to. So we continue to nurture that channel as well. So your expected sort of social media channels, we find a ton of engagement with the younger consumers, but I would just say it's important to also ensure your content's reflecting that consumer as well.
Are you experimenting with any new platforms lately, or what are the ones that you really go to in terms of social, or just reaching younger audiences?
Yeah, we definitely deploy like a test, learn, and scale methodology to any new channel. TikTok's probably the newest channel that we're leaning most aggressively into. And we're learning a ton. I mean, there's so many diverse creators across that network. And finding new ways to partner with the creator network on TikTok is always going to be a full-time job, I would say right now. But that's the one that we're specifically leaning into from the newest channel. We're still finding really interesting ways to continue to drive engagement with the younger consumers, as well as some of the older consumers across the Meta platforms as well. So definitely no silver bullet, I would say, with regard to engaging your consumers that fall on the younger end of the spectrum, but definitely seeing some fun test, learn, and scale opportunities within TikTok.
You really have to keep up with it has to be a full-time job, right? Like
Yes.
in order to see what's next, and the trends, there's always new challenges, things like that. Does Dickies get involved with all those things, or is somebody just kind of watching it, monitoring it, researching
Yeah,
it?
we do. I mean, again, look at Threads as an example, right? Like that thing at launch blew up. Like it exceeded everybody's expectations on the first few days, if not weeks. I would say it kind of fell off a cliff as far as interest and engagement quickly thereafter. So that's what I would just offer as advice. I haven't yet sit in an organization where we have endless resources, right? So you're always trying to deploy your resources in the smartest way. You have to stay up with the trends, absolutely understand what's happening and what best practices are. When Threads launched, as an example, our social media team was absolutely active, testing, watching, observing, and forming opinions for what could this channel do for us in the future? How should we leverage this? Should we go deep within this channel, or should we continue on our path towards deploying our resources to getting the most out of more mature channels for us, like TikTok? So definitely important to stay up with the trends, but also important to not necessarily chase every shiny object with the same level of momentum as you're pursuing your more mature channels.
That's great advice. So tell us a little bit about some of the marketing initiatives that Dickies is either working on now or coming down the pike. What do we have? What do you have in store for everyone?
I think every marketer right now has their eyes set on holiday. We are just a few months, not even a few actually. I would venture to say a few days away from holiday really kicking off. Everything that we've read and observed and seen from a research perspective is saying earlier and earlier. And I think we hear that every year. So we've got some really exciting sort of chaptered approaches to how we're engaging our holiday shoppers this season. In addition to that, which tends to be much more of a commercial gift giving moment, people are seeking deals, especially in these earlier months. For holiday. We're also really excited about some collaborations and some unique launches. I'm not necessarily going to spoil that here, but keep an eye out on the brand, certainly over the months of October and November. Some very exciting things to come, and even revisiting some really exciting partnerships that made a big splash in our past.
Great. So I thought I would shift gears a little bit to open up the conversation to marketing in general, some of your thoughts on the CMO position and how you got there. So what would be your best advice to marketers who are aspiring to reach the C-suite, since you are there and you've had some other CMO roles before this as well, so you have plenty of experience. What would you say to people who are looking to get where you are?
Yeah, every journey is different. So what I'm about to say is really reflective of my personal experience, but I recognize there's a lot of different paths towards obtaining a role like this. First and foremost, I would say my number one job is to be a people leader. So getting people leadership experience, understanding what makes productive and high performing teams is critical. So getting that people leadership experience under your belt as early as you can in your career and really leaning into it. People are both the best part of the job and the hardest part of the job, right? So it's not for the faint of heart, but definitely value it because it is key to success in a role like this. The second part, I would say, being a chief marketing officer requires you to kind of know enough to be dangerous about a lot of different marketing disciplines. Our jobs change every 2 years just based on new technology, new channels, new ways of consumer behavior, et cetera, right? So ensuring that you know enough about each of these areas of your discipline to be dangerous, but don't ever fall into the trap of expecting that you need to be the deepest expert in any single one of them. Again, it's about teams. It's about really understanding how to form and grow those teams. So that may require you to entertain earlier in your career opportunities to get exposure to new areas of marketing. I think it's harder and harder nowadays. Once you become a data and analytics specialist, you end up kind of being perceived as a data and analytics expert, so you may not be considered for something else. So you're going to have to be very active in pursuing that exposure. I think of development as more of a lattice approach versus a ladder approach. If you think of a lattice, it's that sort of hashed grid in your garden, right? So sometimes you might have to go over and then up and then over and then up versus just up, 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 up. And so those opportunities are sometimes hard to mentally wrap your head around, but really look at it in the long term and the big picture.
Yeah, that's interesting advice, to be really strategic about the career itself, right? And that journey and all the different aspects that you're going to need to be a well-rounded CMO. Excellent.
Yeah.
Another question I have for you, it's a bit broad. What topics or trends should savvy marketers be paying close attention to right now? What do you think everyone should, besides AI? No.
I was going to say, well, AI is the obvious one, right? How do you use We can use that, though, as a launching pad.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. AI in what way would be my
I think
follow-up.
that's
So what are the trends that people should be keeping an eye on?
That's the loudest voice in the room right now.
Yeah.
And I think it's because exactly how you just framed that question. How should we be using it? How should we be looking at this? I think that there's again the shiny object risk. However, I think AI absolutely has a really important and long-standing role within our worlds. I don't personally sit in the camp where I believe it's replacing people's jobs. I think that there is an art and a science that makes things magical. And I think that there's a lot of good examples out there of brands who are deploying AI in really interesting ways. And, whether it's Claire's is somebody I'm watching a lot, actually, which is, a brand from my past as a young, I can remember just like walking into the mall and into a Claire's store. And I think maybe I got my ears pierced there for the first time. They're completely reinventing themselves right now for Gen Alpha, Gen Z. And AI has been a really important part of that. If you just look at one of their recent campaigns that they launched, Pierced, good example of how you can use AI to create and design products. I guarantee you there is a person on the other end of that who's helping to curate that story as well. So I think that's a trend to continue to evaluate with regard to what's the best, most appropriate use case it can have for your brand and your business.
Wonderful. Actually, those are the questions I had for you. I have one more that I'd like to pose in a little bit, but we have a couple questions from our audience here. I wanted to give you a chance to respond to those. The first one is, how do you internally manage boundaries to protect core brand equity and integrity while reaching out to new segments with different communications approaches?
Yeah, love that question. That's a really relevant question for Dickies as well, because we tend to attract this incredibly diverse community and brands that look at us with aspiration as a result, which is an amazing position to be in. First and foremost, I think it's always, always, always important to remember why you exist in the first place. And this can actually really simplify the choice. And I've experienced this at a couple of different places I've worked as well. I'll use maybe a different brand as an example. I've spent about 6 years at Vans. And in marketing at Vans, you tend to get phone calls from everyone who wants to partner with you. And it was very simple. It was boards and bikes at the time. So we supported skateboarding, snowboarding, BMX, at the time, even motocross. So when I would get a phone call, say from NASCAR or something of that that would say, hey, we'd love to sponsor our riders, our athletes love wearing Vans. It was easy for me to just hang up the phone politely and say, thank you. But that's not really what our brand is here. It's about boards and bikes and creative self-expression. We have that here at Dickies as well. We are a workwear brand. First and foremost, the functionality of our product is the reason why we exist in the first place. We're for the workers all over the world. And so ensuring that there's a level of craft and maker aspect to any brand and partner that we, consider is really important. Now, that's not very black and white. That can take on a lot of different meaning, a high design aesthetic. If you can imagine the partnerships of the past of Gucci and Opening Ceremony, very high design aesthetic, very detailed, very meticulous. There's an aspect of that in our brand as well. So there's interesting overlaps that allow you to consider unlikely candidates for partnerships, but it all has to come back to who you are at your core and what you ultimately stand for, and making that as simple as possible to understand and cascade across your organization.
That's a great answer. I love Vans, big fan went to school in California, so I love that. The next question we have from our audience is, what would you consider to be the most interesting marketing tactic on the horizon?
Well, maybe an unorthodox answer to this. It's not really a tactic. It's a group. I am just excited to learn more about the upcoming generations, understanding their relationship between purpose and brand purpose specifically, and how brands contribute to their purpose. This notion of brands needing to be bigger than the things that they sell, period. And how do brands lean into that? How do brands really reflect the needs of this upcoming generation? I think that's just fascinating. I could sit and read about Gen Alpha and Gen Z all day long. I happen to have a son who's 11. So, I've got my own little focus group here. So, but really understanding the relationship between brands and this consumer group is really interesting at a time where the field, I think, is changing dramatically right in front of us. We've gone through this, growth hacking era, which is still incredibly, important in some aspects, but I think people have maybe swung too far. A lot of the marketers I'm talking to are over investing in sort of transactional marketing, and that's requiring under investment in building brand and brand storytelling and ways for new consumers to fall in love with brands and create loyalty. I think that's going to change. I foreshadow this balance getting back to hopefully a healthier balance in the future.
Yeah, that's a great point. I remember when people started talking about, the industry started talking about purpose being important, and you weren't sure if it was really going to catch on and be something that really took off. And it seems like the younger generations are sure that that's going to be a part of
Right.
the brand.
Requiring it. I mean,
Yeah.
when you get to the landscape that we're in today, there's no shortage of choice, right? So how do you stand out in a sea of so many options? And that's relevance at the end of the day. And if relevance for this upcoming generation is this brand has some skin in the game against something that I care deeply about, brands need to really consider what that means for their strategies.
Well, Sarah, I think that is a great question to end on. That's a really good look at our future, the future of marketing. So I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us today. And thank you, all the viewers on LinkedIn, for joining us for our first Marketers on Fire. We're going to be doing them about monthly. So stay tuned for our next one. We'll send you an email about it and make sure that you save the date. Thanks again, Sarah, and hope to see you all soon.
Thanks for having me.